as you get to a community, you get a higher density, and I don't have a percentage, I don't kind of think of it quite that definitively, but I would say between 30 and 70% of the individuals within that community know of each other or have relationships with each other. And when you're a community manager, what you're trying to do is not have a personal relationship with all those people, you're trying to get them to have relationships with each other. And that's where the real value comes on the business outcome side as well, because those individuals help provide value to each other that you don't have to be in the middle of. And then you get down to a group, and groups, almost everybody in the group should know each other, and you're most likely collaborating on something together. That's more of a business team internally, we're all working on a counter project, whatever. And again, the relationships are very densely cross-hatched there. And then obviously on the one-on-one relationship, it's 100%. When I have a relationship with one other person, I can't have 50% of a relationship with that other person. So that's kind of how I think about that. And it's also how I think about when I advise companies of what they're trying to do. If you're trying to do lead gen or awareness, you really want the network. You're trying to find people you don't already know, not build relationships with people you already know. If you're trying to extend the lifetime value of your customer, you already know that customer. You want them in a community. You want them helping each other so they reinforce value for each other, assuming there's like, again, if you have a crappy product, your community's not going to solve that problem and fix the crappiness of the product. But they will support each other, they will innovate together, they will, I'm trying to think of I forget the company that I was talking to, but they have a community of creative professionals, and it's somewhat similar to Adobe in that you as a company can't know everything that your customers are going to do with your product. And you can't document it. That documentation is really expensive to do, and so you document the biggest use cases. Well, there's always people at the fringe of the network doing something weird with your software that's very cool and innovative, but you can't capture that as the company. Well, if you allow them to tell their story, they're going to help 100 other people, which you could never do from the cost perspective. And so that's where a community comes in to that. And then when you're kind of in internal or partner communities, you get into the more collaboration end of the space where you're adding wikis to that and you're actually co-producing together. And sometimes those are customer communities. If you're doing co-innovation with your customers, it's usually a larger or a smaller group that you've invited in, and they've explicitly agreed to help with that. So, any questions about that?
Just, I want, I guess, clarification. When you were talking about the community where 30% have relationships with each other, and that was sort of, like you said, that was sort of where the community manager would come in and help frame. I mean, my understanding that was kind of where moderators come in. I mean, so where's the difference?
Get to community management and what that is in regards to moderation and kind of what community management is. Moderation changes quite a bit from big consumer socialized websites that are, take ESPN or Disney or whatever. People are chatting about the Oscars, they're saying all sorts of things about people. Moderation is really the process of making sure all of that contribution is funneled through some analysis tool and blacklisted words are rejected. You can white label people. It's to make sure the terms of service are not being violated and that the content on the site is appropriate for the purpose of the site. Moderation in a community environment or a more B2B environment tends to take on people who have really big issues and are causing trouble and continually rehashing something that you've tried to resolve. It's not high volume, you don't use automated tools. The phone is a good tool for that type of moderation. Old technology works still. but it doesn't happen as often. It happens very rarely that you're moderating it in the traditional sense in that kind of environment. So community management then takes over where moderation ends, which is moderation is, you can think of it as the traffic cop. Like, stop doing that, this is not intentional. The community manager is more thinking about the business, saying, okay, what's the business outcome we're trying to achieve here? And facilitating the conversations proactively in that community. They could be doing content and programming. They could, a lot of what the community manager does, it's interesting, I look at communities and often if you look at a community, it looks very placid on the surface, and there's a ton of stuff going on underneath the surface that you don't even see in active communities. And I kind of call that the iceberg effect of community management, because there's the explicit interactions and relationships that are happening, and then there's all the back channeling. And good community managers spend a whole lot more time back channeling than they do being visible on the site, because in psychology and research, it's pretty effectively shown that the best way to influence somebody is through their peers, not through an authority figure. So you as the community manager don't often want to either have the answer or kind of step into a conversation unless it's really necessary. But you do want that question to get answered, and you do want to create that engagement. And so a lot of what you do is contact, know your community people, have relationships with the most active members of that community, and do a lot of prodding and encouraging of them behind the scenes to make sure that the visible activity is going the direction you want it to go and productive. And so triangulation, back channeling, all of these things that are really done behind the scenes are a big part of what community managers do. And I think it's one of the things that makes it really hard for business colleagues of community managers to know what the hell they're doing all day. We get a lot of, like, nobody knows what I do all day, because they're emailing, they're DMing on Twitter, they're facilitating and pushing and encouraging, but not directly publishing in their own right. So that's an important point. And then the other thing that community managers are really responsible for doing, communities are these tough things where there's a lot of constituents with a lot of different interests. All of those need to be balanced for the community to be productive over time. One can't outweigh the other. If you overemphasize what the sponsoring organization needs, you won't be focused on the community, and they'll leave because they're not getting what they need out of the community. So you've got to balance the needs of the people that are participating in the community with the needs of the business, and it can't be black and white. A lot of community management, it sits in this gray area, and translation skills are one of the most important things that community managers do. They translate what the company is saying into the language that the community understands and cares about, and vice versa. So that's a huge portion of what community managers do.